Thanks for coming out to see me today, Nathan. I want to preface our conversation a little bit with who you are and how I got to talking to your guys' organization. It was about a month ago I reached out to you guys. On October 7th, I, with the rest of the world, kind of witnessed some pretty tragic and terrible news coming out of the conflict of Israel and Palestine. And it was a really weird feeling for me because in my lifetime I haven't kind of seen history like that in front of me. It was the first time in my life I felt a tangible connection to something that people are going to talk about for a long time. And since then, there has just, you can't avoid that conversation on the internet. It's what everybody talks about. And I have a really weird space of the internet that I guess I communicate in here on TV. And I was like, what can I do when I talk about the community to help me contextualize what I'm seeing in front of me? I've been to your museum a lot. You are from the Holocaust Museum here in Albuquerque. What's your guys' official name for the museum?
So we are the New Mexico Holocaust and Intolerance Museum, and we're located here in Albuquerque, local, and we have a mission to really spread awareness for the Holocaust, but also really spread awareness for the intolerance part of our name, working with local groups to kind of help spread Native histories and histories of the state that fit our mission statement.
And that's kind of the part that I was really interested by your museum is I've gone there quite a few times. When you walk in on the entire left side, it's completely dedicated to the Holocaust, and I love that. You have a lot of interesting artifacts there from stories that you can go and follow. And on the right side of the museum, you have all of this history for Native and colonial America. And a lot of it is stuff sometimes I knew, but I think you guys put it together really well that even if you are familiar with this, it's pretty moving to go see it in person. And even if you're not, if you're trying to learn about this, you have a lot of in-depth things that you can go listen to, personal experiences, which aren't always available. So for me, I wanted to have an interview where I could help contextualize what I'm seeing now in front of me, how someone here in Albuquerque can contextualize it, and how I think your museum has a mission that kind of helps us do that, how it helps us build in our heads the way that we need to think about really tragic events in front of us and humanize everything in a way that needs to be done. How did your museum get started, though? Maybe that's the thing I want to start with. Who's your founder?
So we were founded in the 1990s by a gentleman named Werner Gellert. Werner was a survivor of Kristallnacht in Germany. His family fled to Shanghai, China after that event, and then they made their way to Albuquerque later on.
So he spent how long in concentration camp then?
So he wasn't in a concentration camp. So what happened with his family was as soon as Kristallnacht ended, which was kind of a mass state-sanctioned violent riot in Germany, his family made the decision to move, and they went to a kind of a refugee area in Shanghai that a lot of Jews would flee to. And then they stayed there for a while and then moved to the United States following that. But when he was when he got to Albuquerque and decided, when he grew a little older, decided that the state needed a Holocaust museum to kind of tell these stories. So it was founded, and then we moved into our space downtown in 2009, and we've kind of grown since then and really kind of, focused on what our mission statement is and how we're going to really focus on what the motivations Werner had when he first established the museum, and how we can modernize those and really push those.
So he came here to the U.S. and to Albuquerque specifically, and he kind of had this vision of, my people really went through this incredibly tragic thing. I have a space here that I can create in order to help deliver that information. So how long have you guys been, so since the 90s you guys have been doing this, but if someone were to go there right now, what is it they can really expect to get out of the museum?
So if you come to the museum today, we have, like you said, 2 different exhibits basically set up. You walk in, you have the Holocaust exhibit on the left, and you have other genocides and moments of intolerance on the right. And we really cater to visitors experiencing very specific things at our museum. I always try to stress to people that you can learn a lot of these things online these days or through books, but what makes a museum special is what we have in our collection that we can showcase and how we can tell our story through that. So we have a very vast collection of very specific artifacts from the Holocaust, as well as other genocides.
And what are some of those artifacts?
Just so
for those listening.
We have a shower head from Majdanek, which is a death camp from the Holocaust. We also have a shoe that was taken from a child victim at that camp.
A child's shoe that's just
Yes.
there in the museum.
Yeah, and we kind of tell, we explain these certain events through the lens of these artifacts. We explain how possessions were taken away by way of our shoe artifact. We explain the process the Nazis took to murder all these people by way of our showerhead artifact. We also have something called the Flossenburg flag, which was a flag created by prisoners who survived Flossenburg concentration camp, and they presented it to the Allied troops when they were liberated. It was previously a Nazi flag that was painted to be an American flag for the liberators, and that's an artifact we tell the story of liberation through. So when you come to the museum, you really see artifacts at the front, and we explain the history through those artifacts, so you have that connection there.
So, I mean, that's pretty intense for me, the idea that there was a showerhead in a camp somewhere, and that showerhead was part of the process that took people's life.
Yes.
That people lost their life from what was happening through that piece of an artifact. Now, how is it that kind of, how do you help that explain that then to me? I come upon your museum and I'm looking now at a piece of death, something that has hurt other people. How does that actually affect me? How do I contextualize that to my life? That it's traveled now all the way to your museum and it's sitting there. What does that really tell me? What am I getting out of that showerhead?
It tells you the history, but it tells you history in a way that we really like to focus on personal stories and try to connect to people the best way we can. So when you have an artifact like that and you're looking at it and you're reading about the history of it, what my job is to then connect it to a broader sense of history and how you can kind of use these events and use these artifacts and use what you learn at the museum to improve your situation in your community and understand that these are the extremes of what happened in history, but the extremes of what happened in history don't start in a vacuum. They start over time, and things that we see at a very basic level that we teach in the museum, it kind of feeds into and up to this extreme level over time without anyone doing anything about it. So what my job is to kind of provide that context and say, yes, you're looking at objects of death, you're looking at objects that took so many lives, but here's what you can get out of it, and here's the tools that you can use to get that information.
One of the things that was really jarring for me about the showerhead specifically in there is, it's not just a showerhead. There's lettering on it. Someone, I don't know. I mean, now it would have been like printed on there, but I think at that time it must have been painted on there, whatever those letters are. So people took the time to make these things, and that's one thing I also think people can get from your museum a lot is these camps. They're very much viewed in the lens of this is where people were kept and killed. But I don't think they get the industrialization aspect.
Right.
These people were prisoners making their own tools of destruction. What's that kind of feel like to have something that's actually not just a piece of death and not just a tool for it, but you can actually know that the entire complex was working towards that. That was actually what the prisoners built themselves towards almost.
Yeah, and I always stress with students this industrialization part. And the 2 points to kind of go off of here, the industrialization and also how even if you weren't directly involved with the killing, there's a lot of individuals who are involved with the process of the Holocaust and the final solution. So the industrialization, and whenever I take student tours through the exhibit, I always stop. We have one exhibit after our final solution exhibit that shows kind of a model, 3D model of a camp. And I always ask them, what does this look like to you? What have you seen in your everyday life that it looks like? And about 3 or 4 responses in, a student says, oh, it looks like a factory. And I really want to stress to students, like, this was an event that the Nazis wanted to make as efficient, as systematic as possible. And they drew a lot of inspiration from factory works, a lot of inspiration from assembly lines to make these systems as efficient as possible. So it's essential to understand that because it really shows how this wasn't, of course it wasn't a randomized killing, but it was so thought out and so planned that it was as efficient as possible. And that showerhead represents that.
And so that's kind of what's really jarring when you look at I think the evolution of what the camps became. Because as I understand, it wasn't immediately even clear what they were going to do with the prisoners that they had collected. They rounded up the Jews and all of what Germany could get their hands on, but they really didn't know what the plan was. They had the final solution. And actually, maybe you could tell me, for someone who doesn't know, what is the final solution?
So the final solution was an idea that was created at the Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee Conference was a meeting of Nazi officials, everything from Nazi military officials to professors at universities in Nazi Germany, to decide how can we make the process of killing these people more efficient. Up until that point, we have what is called the Holocaust by bullets, which was mobile killing squads of Nazi soldiers, as well as police battalions that would go from village to village, killing mass amounts of Jews. The Nazis decided it was hurting their war effort, and they didn't want to waste bullets. They didn't want to waste the manpower.
It was a waste of their bullets.
It was a waste of their war effort materials. So they decided we need something that's more efficient. So they used inspiration from what they had previously called the T4 project. So the T4 program was a program that the Nazis instilled to murder their disabled population, and they used gassing with carbon monoxide to do this. So they specifically looked at how can we industrialize this, how can we make this larger. They took the camp systems that they had in what I mentioned earlier with Dachau, and they decided this is the solution to what they called the Jewish question, which was to mass murder a group of Jews.
The question was, what do we do with the Jews? And the best answer that came was, well, almost like when a company is like, oh, we're losing too much on this little part of the process. How do we make this more efficient? How do we do what we need to do but cut costs at the same time? That's what they figured out how to do with mass murder.
Right. And you look at places like Auschwitz-Birkenau, they were killing up to 10,000 people a day. It was a process of they would arrive at the camp, go through a gas chamber, and then they would be cremated, and it would just kind of keep going like a factory system would. Because to the Nazis, they wanted to do it as efficiently and as quickly as possible without taking away from their war effort.
Right. I have a question that's kind of leading away from that, but why don't you think Hitler ever did visit one of these concentration camps? There's no report that ever said he went there himself to see these things. We never even have very good writing that he himself gave all these orders, but it's pretty obvious. Why do you think he kept that distance from what he was doing in this industrialized work?
Right. Adolf Hitler had he had a very profound network of individuals around him that would do the work for him in a different sense. You had Hermann Goering, who was running the Luftwaffe. You had other individuals who were running other aspects of Nazi Germany. So Hitler entrusted Heinrich Himmler to basically head this program of the final solution. And Himmler visited the camps. He made sure things were running smoothly. And I think, to answer your question, I don't have a great answer for you. I mean, historically speaking, I can't really tell you exactly what his psychology was by why he didn't visit it, but I think he knew that if Himmler was handling things, he didn't have to really do things himself.
So that's kind of a scary picture to me, this idea that they had a meeting to figure out what to do about these people that they regarded as cattle, and I've heard accounts from Holocaust survivors that they were told that they were cattle. That you're not human beings, you are cattle, and we're going to move you around like cattle. So in this way, he had this population he had to deal with. He had people that he entrusted in order to take care of those systems. They figured out how do we make the most efficient system possible. And then they went about the process of manufacturing, of planning, setting up the spaces to do it, and executing their plan. And that is found in your shower head. When you go to a shower head, you see a piece of, I think it's silicone, it looks like, that they have shaped in order to kill people. People have painted it. There was serial number. I don't know if that's a serial number. I actually wish do you know what some of those markings are on it? Do you know what
they were trying to keep track of? A lot of those markings are just to indicate which camp system it's at. And, again, like I said, the Nazis kept records of everything. And this is just kind of evidence of that, of how they kept track of different parts of their industrialized killing machine.
Wow. So that's pretty powerful to then basically have all of that history stored in your shower head. And when you look at that shower head, you can essentially see that entire decision making of the industrialized death
Right.
happening. And very much in the same way, you know, you look at any electronic device, it's going to have numbers on there, and that's what they were doing, but with death. That's, So how does a society come to that? How does a society take all of those tools of industrialization, organization, and distributed labor and say, we're going to not apply these towards technology, towards entertainment. We're going to see if we can kill this group of people as efficiently as possible. How does an entire group of people get to that point?
Well, it kind of goes back to why anti-Semitism was popular in the 1930s. Not everybody in Germany was anti-Semitic, but it came to a point in the 1930s and 40s where the Nazis had so much power that a lot of individuals just felt like, I just need to go along with it because what other choice do I have? You had resistance movements in Germany,
Right.
White Rose Society, a lot of whom were killed, but you had people who resisted this. But for the majority of people in Germany, they're what we call bystanders at the museum. They just kind of let things go. And for the people who are anti-Semitic, I mean, it goes back to issues as far back as, you know, the dawn of, you know, the death of Christ. You know, Jews being blamed for that.
Right.
And then
You don't have to look too hard to find any hatred of
Right.
Jews in history. So.
Right, and then the expulsion of Jews from the Middle East, forcing them to Europe, and then what I always tell students is anti-Semitism is based in conspiracy, and it's based in this idea that the Jewish people want to have power economically and politically over everything. That's a major conspiracy that was
And that's
kind of
something that's still
popular.
maintained today. People
Right.
still think that in our nation.
Right, and I always tell students, you know, where do these conspiracies come from? Well, if you want to look at the economic conspiracy, the Jewish people in the Middle Ages were forced to do jobs like tax collecting, forced to do jobs like banking, because they were seen as undesirable to non-Jewish populations at that time. So it's the same thing that Jewish people are seen as conspirators for today, were actually things pushed on them hundreds and hundreds of years earlier.
So are you ever nervous that maybe because those seeds of hate still exist around society, that you can go back up to that place that we were before? Do you think that it's still possible, or do you think we have learned enough of a lesson? Where do you think we're going in that way?
I mean, I think there's always possible to have really bad moments of hate. But what our institution does, and what a lot of institutions do around the world, is, you know, our sole purpose of educating is to make sure we don't get to that point again. We start at the base level. We start with discussions of how to address your biases, how to understand and identify racism. What is racism? What is anti-Semitism? How do we go about these things at a level with students that they can impact their communities in a positive way? And that's how you fight against these things from happening. Because, historically speaking, you look at a lot of these genocides, they get to the point of genocide because there's a group of people who kind of just act as bystanders and let things happen because maybe it's not impacting them at that moment. So once, that's where the solution is. It's with educating that group of people that when you see these moments of intolerance, you need to take action and you need to identify it and not be afraid to speak up and defend a group of people.
So I think you guys actually have a good tool for this too. You guys called, I think, the Pyramid of Hate.
Right.
What is it? The Pyramid of hate, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
So we work actually directly with the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, to utilize their Pyramid of Hate throughout our museum process. So again, a lot of our docents, whenever they give tours, they use this Pyramid of Hate as kind of a really basic context that when you're going through giving a tour, you always kind of refer back to this. So just kind of a brief summary of the Pyramid of Hate. It has different levels to what we kind of describe as kind of leading to genocide. So the tip of the pyramid is genocide, and the very bottom are things like biases, personal biases, and then you kind of grow to like racism, anti-Semitism, and different aspects, and it kind of gets more extreme as you move up the pyramid. So we always, ask people as we give tours, where do you see this issue if we're talking about a specific issue in history? Where do you see this on the Pyramid of Hate, and what are you going to do if you were faced with that situation?
That's kind of interesting too. So you can actually go and see different periods in history, different events, and say, well, that's not the pinnacle of what hate is, but you're clearly building on something right there. And I'm sure in U.S. history there's plenty of those moments you can go and say, here, let's look at this period in U.S. history and let's see where it fits in the Pyramid of Hate.
Right.
And that's what I think the other half of your museum does, is the side that covers all of the segregation issues and native colonization issues that our country has.
Yeah.
So could you maybe give me now a little bit of a breakdown of what that half of your museum goes over?
So that half of the museum, like you kind of mentioned, it's very native focused, as well as you have colonial America going into modern America with the 1960s, the Jim Crow laws, and Martin Luther King Jr., those moments that people really connect to. And then we also talk about histories of the Christian minorities in the Ottoman Empire, and talk about those histories, Chinese Expulsion Act. So we really focus on a variety of different kinds of moments of intolerance on that side of the exhibit. But one thing that we are expanding that we really take pride in is our ability to really tell the story of Native experiences in New Mexico. And we work directly with the IAIA and use their expertise on the subject to really develop a really thought out exhibit in that way. And so we have this opportunity, we really want to take it, and again, it gives us a chance to say, this isn't just something that happened in a vacuum in the 1930s. You see issues with racism, with intolerance throughout American history, throughout world history. And we try to kind of use that to help kind of really show students that it's something worth noting, it's something worth fighting against.
And that's kind of has to be a hard concept in terms of this is something now that's happening a little bit out of our lifetime. At least the Holocaust, there's still survivors around that you can speak to, that you can connect with. But these are kind of events in history that, while closer to home in our own states, they're a little bit more disconnected. So how do you help bridge that gap of time and helping us actually emotionally connect with terror that's happened well before we can kind of reasonably get what the people were going through at the time?
Right, and there's two ways we do that. From an exhibit standpoint, we have connections throughout our exhibit that kind of connect together. So when we're talking about the Holocaust, we talk about the Nuremberg race laws, which kind of designate who's Jewish and who is not in Nazi Germany. It was, that was inspired by American Jim Crow laws. So we can make that connection and students kind of see, oh, things that I learned about American history has connections to what I'm learning about now. So that's one way. The other way we really connect with students, and we really connect with anyone that comes and sees one of our speakers, is we have survivor speakers. And they give a very personal story. Because when you see 6 million, when you see 11 million, you see these numbers, they're very, very extreme. They're very large numbers, and a lot of people, they cannot properly comprehend the human side of things. So we give people opportunities to listen to speakers, to hear their testimony, to hear what they went through as a survivor of the Holocaust, and that helps humanize the whole experience for them, and helps people connect to them, connect to the topic in a lot more helpful way.
And I think kind of when you're talking about tragedy, it's easy to connect when you have someone there who can tell themselves their own story and kind of defend themselves in that regard. But unfortunately, I think what makes kind of taking what's happened in the past versus what's happening now really hard to deal with in that kind of examination way is you don't have the clear route that history gives us. We had time to beat the Nazis. We know that their story is pretty terrible. We had time to kind of reconcile with colonialization in America and Jim Crow. There's at least time to look at what those guys lost, and we can talk about their loss. Currently, people are fighting about who's right, who is. I never thought I'd live in a world where people are actually arguing about what is genocide and are people committing it, are two people committing it against each other, and I don't know if there's right answers to that. But how do you actually take now what your museum is teaching us about history? How do I walk around today and filter out the chaos that's modern, that's kind of developing, that people still get to say something?
Yeah, the best tool for us to provide is that ADL Pyramid of Hate, because it really breaks down things you can see from an early standpoint before they kind of go more extreme. So you can use that. You can just take lessons from our exhibits, take lessons from what happened 10 years before concentration camps were set up. How can you use history to identify trends and see those trends in modern day? So that's kind of what we recommend. And we recommend everybody understand the history, learn the history, and understand the facts behind things, and then use that to then formulate their arguments.
And I think I struggle with that, because you actually broke that down for me before we even had this interview. So, you know, I did that. I took my pyramid of hate and I went to, you know, the thing that I wanted to kind of contextualize in my mind. I went to Hamas, I went to Israel, and I used the pyramid of hate and I stayed where things fit in. So what do you do when you actually start to have different people where you have multiple pyramids of hate that seem to be building collectively, almost as one side builds theirs a little higher, the next side has to build theirs a little higher. What do you do when you get in this almost pyramid hatred building race where, you know, you're trying to outdo the other, or it's getting mixed now because of the anger from one side? How do you actually start to de-escalate? I get how the pyramid builds. I don't know how you take the pyramid down. What's that process?
It's, you know, and that process is having discussions. Discussions in a very orderly manner, you know, kind of set aside emotions and opinions and have a discussion about what's actually going on, and understanding the facts behind situations and using those tools to then formulate that kind of discussion. And then, you know, that's kind of where you should probably start, and having things to back up your arguments and kind of understanding each side of the story. Understanding where people are coming from in those kind of moments, especially when you have a case like that where it's two different groups who are kind of having those similar experiences. You know, kind of be open to what they're experiencing and how can you kind of change your kind of viewpoint on that to better understand what they're coming from. And so having a discussion is the most important thing. But also, you know, the larger public taking action, again, using the facts, you know, available to them, and using, you know, the history kind of as a context. The public should, you know, not be afraid to take action and to have discussions as well. And you know, the worst things that can happen are things that happen because no one, you know, has a discussion. Nobody talks through issues. They just take action, and they just, you know, it kind of leads to a fight, and it grows in that way. So if you kind of talk through issues and you talk through these things with people, I think you have a much better chance of de-escalating situations.
And I think your model works, especially in the sense of it. You can't really progress unless you acknowledge what everyone's experiencing at the same time. So it has to start with a little bit of honesty there. No, you talked about how discussion and actually like reaching out in that kind of community dialogue, that's how you really get to the better place. And I was going to ask how you do that, but actually I think you do know how you do that. Your museum does have ways of doing this. And you were telling me that for the next second Sunday of every month for a while now, you guys are going to have an opportunity to do that. Could you tell me a little about that?
Yeah, so starting next month in December, we're having a speaker series running through April. Second Sundays of every month, Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. Tickets are on sale on our website. And we will have different speakers for each event, everybody from a different cultural background, talking about what our topic is, and it's also the name for the event. It's called Resistance and Resilience. How do they show resistance and resilience in different kind of issues throughout their lives? We look at different cultures. We look at Native cultures, Hispanic cultures.
And you have speakers from?
We have speakers from each, and all except one are local. The other, the one that's not, is a filmmaker from Amsterdam, but it ties in locally with our survivor who's Dutch. So we have a tie there, but the rest are all local. We have individuals who survived Japanese incarceration and exclusion, and we have individuals who, you know, we have Commissioner Stephen Caseta. He's an actor in Breaking Bad, but he's also a politician, so he can talk about those experiences and how he kind of works to improve the community, especially in the way of filmmaking and in comedy and things like that. So we try to get a really diverse group of people that can talk on their experiences in these moments, how it's impacted their life, either in a positive way or a negative way.
And that's the second Sunday from December until when again?
April.
Yes. So I hope anyone here in Albuquerque goes and checks that out.
Yes.
I think that's going to be a really good series that you guys have. But when that's not happening, how else then do you go out and find the kind of dialogue you're looking for? You know, when you're looking either at history or current events, you know, you look for people who have experienced those things. You look for the people who have, you know, walked in the tragedy that you're wanting to look through. But is there ever anything else that you think needs to be looked at when you're trying to comprehend tragedy? Like, what are the kind of the sources that people may not be thinking about when trying to figure out, you know, what's my opinion on something? How do I contextualize horror? You know, what are the sources you really divulge to people?
I personally, what I recommend is anything from our website is something we've curated very heavily. Anything from any.
What's your website?
Is nmholocaustmuseum.org.
Okay.
And we're also Czech partners. So what that means is we're partners with various Holocaust museums and institutions throughout the United States. The National Museum, the USHMM, kind of spearheaded this program to keep us all connected. But that also means we have availability to all their other resources as well. So I recommend the National Museum, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum as a reference for people. And then what I always recommend people do is just read news outlets, but also always read various different news outlets if you're looking for current events. See who's saying which side's saying what, and kind of try to get as much unbiased opinions as you can. That's one of the things I recommend. Read books, read history, never stop learning. That's one thing I always encourage people to do, because the moment you stop learning is the moment you stop really learning in a current event sense as well. So reading about history, proving that side of you, it kind of has a domino effect to help you understand current events as well.
Well, maybe I want to shift now a little bit more into kind of an opinionated kind of question. So you've studied history, you're an historian, and specifically 20th century history. What are would you say are the things that we have done in our history that you've studied that are still very much in the seeds of our society in America today?
Right.
What are some things that you've actually looked at and you've said, all right, well, this is what these societies did, this is what they did in order to create horror. We still have that ability here and maybe the opportunity to do it. What are some of the certain things you think you see in our society?
Right. Personally, one of the main focuses of my research was from looking at media sources, and something I'm really passionate about is educating people on how to approach media sources. So I looked at, one of the examples I like to give is it's called the Dreyfus Affair. It happened in France in the late 19th century, 1890s, where a Jewish soldier was basically put on trial for treason, even though he was innocent, and it was one of the first major anti-Semitic trials in Western Europe. So the big part of that was media played a huge role in actually finding the truth and finding his innocence. At the same time, media also played a really big role in amping up the anti-Semitism, amping up that he was guilty. So it's one of the first instances where I really see a big media battle in history over a topic of kind of that has modern implications as well to it. And so, really learning about how history and media work together has really improved my ability now to really look at media sources and how there might be biases behind different media sources and how we can kind of filter that out and what to look for.
Yeah, and that's definitely the crux of right now is, especially there's it's almost impossible to filter to some extent now in terms of there's an infinite amount of opinion to gather, an infinite amount of journalism you can read.
Right.
So for someone who is kind of approaching that, what's the best recommendation you can give of saying, how do I tell that this might be a bit biased, this might be a bit more true to what's happening? How do you find true journalists and how do you stick with them?
It's all about, like I said, especially in this day and age, it's actually a lot more important for you as a consumer to do your due diligence and to really focus on, I'm going to read as many news sources as possible. Pick a topic and read and see kind of how they differ. Don't be afraid to look at source material from other countries. I always recommend looking at source material from the UK, from Australia, if you don't have experience in other languages. They tend to give an unbiased opinion on international issues as well. So, just, doing your homework and really kind of not being afraid to read different sources and then finding the ones that you kind of make your opinion over, that they don't have an intrinsic amount of bias. And I always push, if you're looking for a true unbiased opinion, go for a source that's not directly involved with the issue.
Interesting.
So I always say, go to a British-based source or an Australian-based source because they'll probably have an unbiased, more unbiased.
They're looking from the outside.
They're looking from the outside in. And it's always good to get both the outside-in perspective and the inside-out perspective.
They're two different perspectives that you almost need both if you want to have
Right.
a good picture of it. I will say one thing that I kind of found difficulty in my own life growing up is in trying to understand in that way was Native history in our country. And you know, I went to as many sources as I could. I love history, but I don't think I ever got an accurate picture of just how horrific the colonization of the Americas was, how bad all of these different cultures around this land essentially got boxed in, shoved different places. And it wasn't until I got to start speaking with people who knew their story of their family, who I could actually see tangibly what their communities were being impacted by the policy that currently exists. You know, reading wasn't enough for me. I thought I had a pretty good understanding, and then I'm like, oh, no, I don't know how terrible this was. So you actually can read, I think, pretty well and still come away not really getting either what's true or not true. And, you know, that can be pretty difficult. How do you think you really take into seriousness when people claim tragedy? Because I think that's what I see most right now is people kind of denying that tragedy. Whether it's Native history, I still see a lot of people doing that in our nation. Whether it's either side of this conflict that I kind of set up talking about. How do you approach this without denying terror, but also accepting what people might be telling you is happening to them? How do you make sense of that? That's not easy when people tell you different things.
It's difficult, and again, what we try to do at the museum is we really take everyone's stories, and we respect them, and we understand that there's a lot of personal trauma as well inflicted because of these events, and there's no reason to ever discount that. You never should.
You should never discount someone's like traumatic memory of something. Right.
So for us, it's providing the history behind it, and understanding people have trauma to these issues. And you mentioned Native histories being an outlet to provide that history in a very honestly unfiltered way, and being upfront with what happened. And when we have people that come in that are either emotional or they have issues with things, we always say, these are our sources, this is the material. Or if people are emotional, then we try to understand why. And us understanding why helps improve our programming and how we can better educate people. And so, I don't know if that really answered your question, but it's a difficult question.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a straightforward answer to that question. Yeah. Maybe one thing that kind of actually might help kind of put that into perspective better is, I imagine with the Holocaust, you don't get a lot of people going in disagreeing with your take on the Holocaust. Like, oh no, by the way, I was for that. No, I don't think you get that a lot. But for Native history, I find quite a bit people who are like, well, yeah, this was all terrible, but look around, isn't this great? How do you approach that conversation at your museum? Because I'm sure there are people who come in who have, hopefully people who go to your museum are already at a place where they're more willing to be enlightened by tragedy. But how do you actually deal with that at a museum? Do you have a policy that you actually approach people who are ignorant on these things by, or is there just a personal way that you have found is the best way to help open up someone's mind who's kind of a bit sheltered to that?
I mean, personally, it's about, I believe it's about education. And people who come in with those opinions, most of the time, it's not from a place of anger, of hate. It's from a place of, like you said, not being well-versed in the subject. So we teach them about what happened and how dangerous and how horrible these removal processes were for the Native Americans. And a lot of times, through that educational process, kind of explaining what happens and kind of, to be frank, not showing them images, but like talking them through how grotesque some of these issues were and how horrible they were. A lot of people will leave with like, okay, well now I understand. Now
that's a ray. That's a ray of hope for sure. In the sense of like, that might be on the pyramid of hate a little bit, right? You're on if you're on that point of denying and justifying tragedy. But with just by solving the ignorance side of things, you can actually get them off that pyramid of hate. You can kind of start moving people back towards the side, of peace and tolerance, which is what I think you guys aim to do. And that's good that a museum can at least have that effect if you educate people. Maybe you take away the hate a little bit. So educating yourself is the best way to approach that.
Yeah, and I always tell people, it's like everybody has biases. It's inescapable. Right. So when I say people are on a level of the pyramid of hate, I'm not saying that they're a horrible person. I'm saying we all have our biases. But what makes our museum special is we help open their eyes to the fact that they have these biases, and help them kind of confront issues following that and kind of understand why they have these biases. And it's not, some biases aren't bad. Some biases you have because, maybe you're a fan of a certain sports team and you're born in that geographic area, so you're biased to always support them. Biases are part of our human life and it's part of being a human. But when it gets dangerous, you need to be able to understand why it's getting dangerous and how that can impact that issue. Whenever we give tours, we always stress to students that, we're going to talk about issues that some of you might not be it might be uncomfortable. We're going to talk about the Atlantic slave trade. We're going to talk about slavery in America and Jim Crow laws. And we don't want students to feel like they're being kind of targeted. It's the same way when we're trying to educate someone on Native American experiences. You're not being targeted because you just aren't well versed in this topic, but we want you to know what happened historically and how you can be a part of preventing that from ever happening again.
And I can't imagine that's easy when you're talking about someone's own community and when you're talking about that, it's New Mexico. You're going to have kids next to you that probably have some different historical experience when it comes to their family about how this country was formed. So you're running into that quite a bit.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you work with students. That's something I think I want to highlight with your museum, because your museum has a really special way of being able to interact with youth in our city. And how they get approached these topics. So what's the age range that you guys like to work with? And then what are the opportunities that schools have to bring their kids by to your place?
Right. So we do tours and speaking events for students everywhere from 7th grade, with some exceptions based on the group, to 12th grade and then university students. And we also do more adult programs as well. Everything. Younger students, we do very specialized programs for sometimes, really focused on being an upstander, not getting into a lot of the history.
Right, you don't start
for
there.
Obvious reasons. They're not to that point yet development-wise. But we bring that kind of range and we're able to tailor it based on their grade level. But we offer tours of the exhibit as well as speakers. I mentioned how we have speakers, so they usually start, and then we do a tour of the exhibit where we tend to focus on the Holocaust side because that tends to be what the teachers want. But these tours, they're heavily focused on the history and our collections, but also we always tie it back to things like the Pyramid of Hate, things that we can connect to the students, ask them questions throughout to make sure that they feel like they're involved in the tour. So this last calendar year, we've done over 1,200 students come through our exhibit.
Wow, that's a lot.
And we give them the tour, we give them the speaking event, and we always ask them questions. We have an exhibit in our museum called Hate in America, where we give the students the opportunity to really interact with the exhibit and answer questions like how do you practice tolerance in your community, and they answer those questions and make them feel like they're a part of the exhibit. So that's what we do inside of the museum. We also go to students. We go to schools. We went to Atrisco High School recently, and we did a training for the JROTC program there, focused on the Pyramid of Hate. We also do programs for teachers. We develop lesson plans, and everything we do, lesson plan wise, we try to do it from an arts focus. So, one of our executive directors, she's very passionate about the arts. And the arts is a teaching tool, and it's something that I've come to really understand as a powerful teaching tool. So we want students to learn about these events, but also want to do something to where they see the fruits of their labor. They see their education kind of in a physical form. And these projects are a great way to do that. So, we have a really special collection. Dorothy Adams Green, she was part of the Nuremberg trials. She kept a scrapbook. So a way we can implement that is we develop a lesson plan around that scrapbook. Students understand the history. At the end, they create their own scrapbook. It provides them something tangible from what they learned. But they also learn the history, and they also learn why it's important. So those are just a few of the things we do with student groups, and we're always looking for more advanced things. We do teacher professional development to help the teachers understand how to teach these subjects, because they're tough subjects.
Right.
The Holocaust is a tough subject, and we want them to be well-versed and understand the intricacies of teaching it. So we do that, and again, we're always expanding our options for students and teachers.
And if someone is is a teacher and they're wanting to set something like that up, can they go to your museum and kind of say, hey, I got a group of kids, I want to introduce this subject to them, we've been talking about it and we want to kind of get into depth a bit on it. Is that something that you guys can do with students? Do you do that all the time?
Yeah, so teachers, you go to our website, visit the museum, has an option for setting up a tour. You put your kind of grade range, amount of students you're having, and then there's a box at the bottom where you can describe how you want your visit, what do you want from your visit, what do you want us to provide, and we can really tailor the exhibit tour to fit that experience. So if you have a group of students who are just being exposed to the Holocaust, we'll provide a lot more context and a lot more basic understanding to what's going on.
Right.
If you have a more advanced group that really focuses on the human rights and maybe the psychology behind it, we'll focus a lot more on talking about pseudoscience and eugenics and why the Jewish people were a target for the Nazis. So we have opportunities to really go in and specify our tours for these teachers. And it's something that you do when you sign up for the tour on the website.
So we got about like 10 minutes left. So the last thing that I think I really want to ask you about is the one question for this interview, which is what the title will be, which is how do we spread peace?
Right.
And that was important for me because when I was looking at the news and I was like looking around town, like who can I talk to about something similar to this? Who do I talk to help contextualize this? That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to see peace be spread into these different conflicts and to see how do you get out of it. And when I look at your museum, I actually have to say, unfortunately, I wasn't very optimistic. The Holocaust seemed to not end peacefully. It took quite a bit of violence to get that to end when it comes to the native colonization of America. I mean, it arguably hasn't ended. There is still an incredible amount of intolerance and hate in this nation. And I actually saw that it was a few months ago, someone defaced the sitting bull that's in front of your museum. And that really broke my heart to see people in our community went to your museum and defaced a piece of history, someone who is a figure to people in our community because they disagreed with it. They went that far. How do you stop that? How do you spread the other way? What is actually, how do you do it? Because I don't think that those two examples in history give me a good way to do it. How do you think we stop that?
And again, it goes back to what we do education-wise. Like you said, our exhibits don't end peacefully. Holocaust never ended peacefully. Native American situations in the United States don't end peacefully. But what our job is as museum educators, museum professionals, is to use these moments that didn't end peacefully and show them students how they can prevent these things from happening again. So it's providing them a case study. We also do, the school tours is a big way of that. We touch the minds of so many students and really impact how they think. We have the opportunity to do that. And so by really catering our tours to that, we have an opportunity to really kind of start at the base level at the younger generation and help kind of put these ideas into their mind.
That's where it comes at the kids, too, is making sure at a young age you're already kind of engaging with these ideas.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard work in the sense of you may not know that you deterred the next Holocaust. You may not know that it's paying off to keep this at bay because until it's really boiled over, it's a bit too late. So how do you kind of keep on that optimism and try to actually, because it seems no matter how hard you fight, people find reasons to hate each other.
Right.
What is actually the goal for getting people, if it's your family, if it's your friends, if it's people in your community? Clearly our community has some disagreement on this. They're defacing your museum. That's pretty disgusting to me. How, if you could actually communicate to that person who defaced your sitting bull in front of that museum, what do you communicate to that person to try to spread peace to him, to say, hey, you're clearly filled with a lot of emotion on this one, but how do you communicate to that guy?
Yeah, the first thing you do is you sit down and you talk about what the history is, and you talk about the facts. But like I mentioned earlier, it's, a lot of these people, the anger we see with a lot of issues comes from them feeling like they're to blame. A lot of people, especially now, no one directly contributed to slavery in America. Nobody directly contributed to issues with natives in a modern sense. No one born now.
Right.
So it's less about, we don't want you to feel like you're a target. We don't want you to feel like you're directly responsible, but you need to acknowledge that these things happened. You need to acknowledge that maybe your cultural group had something to do with this in the past, but you're not the one that's responsible for this. So we really have those conversations, and we try to emotionally calm people down to where we can say, you know, you can do your part in preventing anything like this happening again. And it comes with being educationally sound with history.
It's almost like shifting the responsibility. You're not responsible for what's happened, but you're pretty responsible for what's going to happen going forward.
Right.
So I would say anyone defacing things like that, they're definitely failing in their responsibility.
Yeah. And I always say, there's, you know, it's never too late to impact someone. You know, you could be mad as hell, and you could be doing the worst things, but if you come to terms with what you've done, or what, you know, acknowledge what's happened in the past, there's always, you know, we will always be there as a point of support for people, no matter what has happened in the past. And we will always be a voice for someone who wants to help improve their community and help improve communities and cultures together.
Well, I hope you're right, Nathan, because, I mean, when I look in the city, just, you know, as it stands now, I see a lot of hate when it comes to the divide between natives and the rest of the country, and the way the Pueblos and Navajo Nation, they have their arrangement. I see a lot of hate when it comes to the way people in our city talk about issues that are happening across an ocean, across a country, across the sea, in another place. There's hate, whether it's here or far away, and it spreads so much faster than peace, and it's so much harder to put out than it is to try to get someone on the, I think, the right conversation track. And it can be discouraging sometimes, but I think your museum is a shining light in that way. Because as I was looking around for someone to talk to, as I've been feeling pretty disappointed about a lot of things, I guess, in the world lately, about the way I see tribalism prevail and people interact with each other. Museums like yours, I think, do a really important job of putting into context the human spirit and how that actually leads to mechanized death, which I think we are in no shortage of right now. So I hope people go and check out your museum. I hope they give that a look. And I appreciate you coming out to talk with me today. It was a really good conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fantastic to come on and kind of talk about this. And, you know, one thing I want to say before we end is, we are a small museum. That's our mission, is to kind of spread peace and to spread kind of this history, but it's also, we need the community to be involved as well. We can't do everything ourselves. Community has to be involved as well. So that's why we're always welcoming people to come to the museum and to come to our events and really be involved with us, because you know, we can't do it alone. We need people in the community to join us.
One more time, can you go ahead and give us your museum's name?
So we are the New Mexico Holocaust and Intolerance Museum, and we're located downtown Albuquerque. And
please, everybody, go check them out. They're an incredible museum.
Yeah, we're
all right.
open.
Thank you for coming to see me today.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
All right, we're good here.
Sweet.